The General's Mercy, Prologue, The Drunken Sea Flower, by Deacon. Her whole world ended with the scream of iron-hard timber. The drunken sea flower did not just sink. She was completely and utterly devoured. One moment, the deck was a slippery tilt of slick wood and stinging ocean spray. The air was filled with a metallic taste of fear, profuse sweat, and the brine of the Atlantic. The belly of the ship growled ferociously, her wooden spine snapping and the ocean roaring in to claim its final death tax. "Hold on!" The voice was a jagged shard in the wind, barely audible over the roar of the gale. A hand, calloused and warm, gripped hers with a strength that felt like the only real thing left in a collapsing universe. And for one single heartbeat, she felt weirdly anchored. "Daddy?" The tears of relief poured out of her. She recognized him by the touch of his hand. She looked up. Her eyes were stinging from the salt of the sea and her tears, desperately trying to look upon his comforting face in the force of the relentless spray. She was fiercely determined to keep their fingers locked. "I won't let you go, Daddy," she shouted as loudly as she could muster. That was the exact moment that the final death blow of a wave came crashing through. It came like an enormous mountain wall of icy cold water, roaring like murderous thunder. It slammed into the wreckage with all the force of a falling stone castle. The tight, firm grip with her father's hand shattered, and her fingers desperately clawed at the empty air, catching only the freezing spray where a second ago there had been her lifeline, her peace and security. In shock and horror, she heard her father's final shout, her name perhaps, or a plea was cut short by the suffocating weight of the surf. Then came the surging salt water. It burned in her throat, filling her lungs and stung her eyes until the world turned a bruised and deeply battered purple. She was no longer a person. She had become nothing more than debris. Her body tumbled through the churning dark, the current dragging her down into the crashing silence of the deep sea. There was no up, and there was no down, only the cold, indifferent blackness of the abyss. Her lungs screamed relentlessly for air, a fire raging in her chest that mocked the freezing water. She reached out, her small, delicate hands brushing against jagged, floating remnants of her old life. A piece of crate, a frayed rope, but the sea had ripped them away as easily as it had stripped away her entire family. And then the sea finally won. The roar of the storm grew distant, muffled by the heavy shroud of the water. The panic faded into a strange, terrifying peace. She stopped fighting the current and let the darkness pull her toward the floor of the world. She had become a ghost before she was even dead, a soul lost between the salt and the stars. She suddenly remembered the rough leather of her father's sporan and how he would dig past his flint and coin to find a loose peppermint for her. It was always a bit furry with lint and smelled a little of wool and tobacco, but to her, it tasted like the safest place on earth. The last thing she felt was the sand course, tearing at her soft, delicate skin like tiny shards of glass, and scraping against her cheek as a final dying wave spat her onto a shore that didn't even know her name. The deafening silence of the land was strangely louder than the killer's storm, and she was the only thing left alive to hear it. Join next week for the release of Chapter 1.